Happy New Year! Happy 2023! Now, you might be spending today with friends and family, or you might be recovering from the excesses of the holidays, but regardless, I've got some fantastic news. It's almost spring, yes! Despite the wintry scene out behind me, and it is quite cold and frosty, I'm going to be starting to sow seeds in less than 2 months. And so that means that it's down to weeks now to sort out my seed sowing schedule and also to plan and finalize goals for 2023. And so this time in between now and then is a great time for all of us to reflect on the previous year and think about the goals that want to bring us into this new growing season. So we're going to go through all of the things that happen in the garden, all of the projects, the builds, the main plants, and then I will introduce you to some of my goals for 2023, some big projects, some little projects, and everything in between. Now, there is a major challenge in the home garden that I only discovered a couple of days ago, and it's making me really nervous and more than a little bit devastated that I found it, but we'll address that in just a little bit. First, let's look at the wonderful thing that is the Polycrub. We've not lived in our home for that long. We bought it in April 2021, which means that last year was the first full year I've had growing in the garden. Now, it has been extremely productive. We've got a lot done, but it has been challenging because our 1/4 acre plot is on a slope, which means that it was also very challenging when thinking about the one thing that I wanted to have in the garden more than anything else, and that was more covered growing space. The Isle of Man has kind of a Goldilocks type climate. It doesn't get too hot, it doesn't get too cold, but that can make things a bit difficult when you want to grow heat-loving plants. And so having an outdoor covered growing space that I could grow aubergines and tomatoes and peppers and melons, it was just really something that was important to me, but being on a slope made that challenging. Fortunately, at the very back of our property, there's a relatively level, slightly sloping surface, and that was probably the only place that I could ideally put a polytunnel. Polycrubs are hard-shelled polytunnels, and they've been developed by a permaculture group based in the Shetland Islands, a place that gets extreme weather in the form of storms. And so the fact that they are peppered throughout the Shetland Islands, people use them as growing spaces, as outdoor leisure areas, it just proved to me that if they're going to survive there, if they're going to do well there, they're going to have a fantastic time growing vegetables here on the Isle of Man. Getting the polytunnel installed though, it was a bit of a challenge because it is a permanent structure. I needed planning permission. The area at the back of the house wasn't perfect, and so we had to work the bank that was behind the flat area. And once we pushed that back, once we had leveled the space a little bit, then it was time to build the Polycrub. Now all the parts had to be shipped here from the Shetland Islands, and we needed the help of professional joiners to help us to build it. Josh and I put in the foundations for the main poles, so we spent a lot of time out there. We actually had a jackhammer because the ground is so solid, so hard, that it was virtually impossible to dig. We got those in. John, Dog, and Dave showed up. They built the structure in about 2 weeks' time. And then at the end, I had this incredible permanent outdoor growing space, sized 4 by 7 meters, perfect for us, but it was empty inside. Now, from our experience of trying to put in the foundations, we knew that the ground was hard, it was impenetrable, and it didn't have very much in the way of topsoil or nutrients. And although I'm a no-dig gardener, I knew that the only solution, the only realistic solution, was to put in raised beds. And so that was our next project, building them on either side and right down the middle. We used topsoil that we had retained from the back of the slope, so behind the Polycrub. We had to spend a lot of time in getting the stones out, filtering it of roots, and making sure that it was a really nice texture. We combined that with organic compost that we bought in, filled up those beds, but not before doing probably the most genius thing that I learned last year when it comes to raised beds, and that is siliconing all of the nooks and crannies, all of the crevices, all of the cracks inside the raised beds before filling them. And that has helped each of those beds to retain moisture, and also it stops slugs and snails from going into those places and making themselves at home. So if you are building raised beds this year, definitely check out the video that I produced on creating those raised beds, because it shows you exactly how we did it, and it has been the best thing ever. Once the beds were in, once we'd filled them, I mulched the top with more compost, and then it was time for planting. I'd started off lots of seedlings, tomatoes, aubergines, cucumbers, melons. They were all started in the house, hardened off in the greenhouse and out on the deck. And then I planted them inside. And it was so hard at that point to imagine the jungle that they would become, because there were times this summer that I couldn't quite get through parts of the Polycrub because there was just so much lush growth, especially in the areas where I grew the butternut squash. So hands down, installing, growing, and harvesting from the Polycrub last year was one of the best things that could have ever happened. It was phenomenal. I cannot recommend Polycrubs more. And going into this year, you're gonna see a lot more crops coming out of there, lots of different types of tomatoes. There will be a little bit of rotation going on, but you'll also see a lot more of that understory planting going on as well. A year ago, out here in the veg patch, there were 4 completed no-dig beds. There were the wooden outlines of 6 more. And as far as wood chip paths, there were just a few stretches that were between those finished no-dig beds. And today, what we have are 12 no-dig beds and wood chip paths that surround the main part of the veg patch. Now, wood chip paths are really important to me in my vegetable garden for a number of reasons. When you lay them down, it suppresses the grass and the weeds, and so you have nice walking spaces and you don't have to spend any extra time weeding in those areas or cutting the grass. They're also a free material for me, so I can get them for free from arborists and tree surgeons who are more than happy to drop off a load every now and again. And then also, over time, those wood chips will break down, and because I have landscaping fabric underneath, I can just take that up and lift that wood chip compost up in a sheet and then put it over onto the no-dig beds. It's free compost for the vegetable patch. They look pretty good too. I really do enjoy how wood chip paths look in the vegetable garden. Now, the lower part of the garden has that 12th no-dig bed in it, and I've not used wooden edging around it as an experiment. The only reason that I've used wooden edging around the other beds is because we're on a slope and I want to stop erosion of the compost and soil into the pathways. But I'm going to see how it all happens with that larger bed that's just down below. You might be wondering right now, what are no-dig beds? Everyone knows that you have to dig beds over. You've got to turn the soil over, and it's an annual tradition, usually in the autumn, and then you dig muck in and all of that. Well, let me tell you that some years ago, I discovered no-dig gardening, and it has changed my life when it comes to the garden. Because everything that we've been taught in the past about turning over the soil was not right. It wasn't correct. We don't have to do it. Even though we've been doing it for as long as we've been growing food, it's not necessary if you just mulch. Literally use compost, put it on top of the soil, and worms will break down what's growing under there, that sod and the dead grass, will take the nutrients from the compost down, and you can have the most fertile and productive vegetable garden without having to manually dig. And I chose to do it for a few reasons, but the main reason I would have to admit, is that no-dig gardening is easier. It is so much easier on your back. You don't have to spend as much time digging, and you get more vegetables in the long run. And it's good for the environment. It's good for your soil. So the hesitancy that I see some people have, or reluctance even, of trying no-dig, honestly, just go for it. It is so much easier. There are a lot of traditional garden beds in the garden right now. No-dig beds out here that are mainly used for producing vegetables, the raised beds in the Polycrub for vegetables, and also pots and containers that are mainly for herbs and also some ornamental flowers. So up to that point, pretty standard fare. But my vision for this growing space is not just to grow plants for us, not just for our use and our table, but also to support local wildlife. And so the plants that I'm starting to put in, well, this past year, but also this coming year, are going to be supporting wildlife. Now, I started off this project with ordering in bare root hedgerow plants last year from a couple of different companies. And they arrived as bundles of dead-looking sticks with no soil around their roots. And we set to work last year in the dormant period and put in a hedgerow on that bank back behind the Polycrub, and also along the side of our property here on the other side of the veg patch. Now, those plants are relatively closely planted, and they're going to form a really dense hedgerow, which we'll have to maintain. But the species that are planted there include elder, sloes, hazel, crab apples. These are all different types of plants that produce nuts or fruit that wildlife can use, but also that we can forage from as well. And it will also create cover for them. It will help to disrupt the flow of wind across the garden, give us a little bit more privacy. And so that was really the first step. And this past year, all of those plants have pretty much survived. There were only a couple that didn't make it. And in some cases, they've actually flourished and grown way larger than I thought they would. Bare root hedging isn't the only type of plant that you can buy as bare roots. Now, you know from the past that I've bought bare root roses, the David Austins, that I brought with me to the new house, and they're planted up against a new arbor. I have also ordered bare root strawberry plants, which I've just planted up, and they're going to be going out into the garden. And last year, I also ordered in quite a few bare root fruit trees. There are two types of fruit trees, two growing standards of fruit trees that we have in the garden. We've got a dwarf variety, so it won't grow much more than about 10 feet tall. Those are the apples that we've chosen. They're on M26 rootstock. And then there's the minaret trees. And I think that I raised more than a few eyebrows when I put in big wooden stakes at the foot of the vegetable patch and put in these little saplings last year. Now, those wooden stakes are really necessary for this type of tree because it grows as a column. and it will have short spurs that come off the side where it will produce fruit, but it will need to have that vertical support to stay upright and to continue life as a minaret tree. They've all grown beautifully, and on either side there are 2 archways, and I've planted minaret trees on either side of those as well. And those trees have grown up, and as they grow taller, I'm going to be bending them over and creating archways made out of fruit trees. And when they are supporting one another, I might even be able to take that metal archway support out as well. And speaking of supports, Noom is a supportive tool that I've been using to help get back on a healthier track. Now, since about 2020, I've been steadily gaining a little bit of weight over time, and I'm now about 10 pounds heavier than I was pre-2020, and I really want to get on top of that for my own health, but also just I want to fit into my old clothes again too. And so this is one of my goals for the coming year. I'm going to shed that weight, and that's where Noom comes in. It's like having a life coach always available on your phone. It combines meal and calorie tracking, exercise goals, and weigh-ins alongside encouraging messages, healthy recipes, and thought-provoking courses. What I like about it is that I don't have to cut out any particular foods as well. So I can still have my chocolate, I can still have my red wine, but it makes me much more aware of what that means to my overall well-being and to my overall goals. It has also been encouraging me to get out for walks. The past month has been crazy busy, and taking care of myself has really taken a back seat. Noom has helped me to be much more aware of what I'm eating and my eating habits, and it's guiding me back to a healthier place. Now, Noom isn't about dieting, but rather helps you to learn to eat better for the long term. It wasn't until I started logging my meals that I clocked that I do pretty well with food throughout the day, but in social situations and evenings, I'm eating and drinking a bit more than my body needs. It's been quite an eye-opener, especially over the holidays. But now that we're past the holidays, I'm feeling a lot more motivated to knuckle down and to lose that weight. And I'm going to be using Noom to help with that. And if you would like to come along and use Noom as well, you can get a free Noom evaluation just down at the link in the video description, or you can go to noom.com/lovelygreens. I've just opened the window and look who's decided to come in. It's Maggie. Say hi. She'll probably kill me, scratch me if I hold her for much longer, so I'm going to put her down. We have actually achieved a lot this year. So let me just tick off this list. We built the Polycrub, a feat in itself. Raised beds inside the Polycrub. More no-dig beds. The wood chip paths all around the vegetable patch. We planted trees and shrubs. We built a deck. We built a sleeper wall back behind the Polycrub and then planted up that bank in a profusion of wildflowers. And then on top of everything, we grew a lot of food, a lot of crops. The Polycrub was especially productive, but the garden beds out here produced heaps, mountains of food as well, which we're enjoying even now, because another thing that I really started getting into was preserving a lot more of our vegetables this past year. And so there are stacks of roasted tomato sauce down in our freezer. There's green tomato chutney in the cupboards. There's all different types of frozen vegetables that I've blanched and frozen and have packed away in freezer bags. And going into next year, there'll be a lot more pressure canning as well, since I have a pressure canner. So looking back now, we have done a lot, and seeing what you can actually achieve in a year makes me feel even more motivated for this coming one. Plans for this coming year. Now, the biggest change is that I'm giving up my allotment. I've not shared very much about the allotment over the past year, and that's because I've pretty much left it, because I didn't have any time. I've been so busy here, zero time. And so that really helped me to make that decision to give up the allotments, and I'll have it for a couple more months, and then I'll turn it back into the association and they'll find someone else to garden on it. But there are lots of plants on the plot that I would love to take home. You know though, from previous videos, that there is an invasive pest on my plot called the New Zealand flatworm. And so it makes me very reluctant to dig plants up and take anything that has soil around its roots home, because the flatworm lives in the soil, it lives on the soil, its eggs can be mixed up in there and it's impossible to see them. And once you have New Zealand flatworm in your garden, you can basically say goodbye to a good part of your earthworm population. And so I plan to move some plants, but I'll be spraying off all of the soil and making sure that they're proper bare root plants when I bring them home. And that includes strawberries and the raspberries. I have to have a look at some of the other plants. Which brings me to some pretty bad news that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. I've been so careful here in the home garden. Whenever I bring home vegetables from the allotments, I always make sure that any soil that comes with goes back to the allotment, or I'll put it in the bin. I don't want to have the New Zealand flatworm in the garden. 2 days ago, I was out in the side yard. Now the side yard I don't really show you because we've not done anything with it. It's just a place where we stack timber and we've put other things there just as a kind of a storage area really. It's something that we'll tackle not this year, but maybe the year after as another growing space. Anyway, I was over there a couple days ago and I was moving wood. We had another wood pallet come in, a flat one, so I wanted to rearrange the wood so that all of our timber is sitting up on top of these flat pallets. And I was lifting up all of these wood pieces and caught my breath, because under the last one, there were 2 New Zealand flatworms. I've been moving some wood over here in the side yard, and my worst nightmare is realized. Now, you can see there's some worms here, so those are the kind of composting worms. But over here, 2 New Zealand flatworms. I've not seen them in the garden thus far. I'm hoping that these came in on a piece of wood, that they're isolated, and that I won't have a problem. So I need to go and get a little container of salt and dispose of these guys. It has preyed on my mind ever since, because if there are 2 New Zealand flatworms in the garden, more are certainly there. It will just be the tip of the iceberg. And out here in the veg patch, there are still worms, earthworms, and I've not seen any New Zealand flatworms, which makes me think that the New Zealand flatworms are really just contained in that area over there. It's surrounded by concreted areas, so the underneath the deck, it's all concrete. And then running down the side of the house, that's all paved in the front. We've got a new driveway down there actually. So I'm hoping, I'm praying that the New Zealand flatworm problem will stay in that area and won't spread, but I don't know right now, and I don't know how it got there. So this is going to be a massive challenge for me, both emotionally having to deal with this at home, but also I'm going to have to put traps out there. I'm going to have to stay on the ball with catching New Zealand flatworm and killing them, because I don't want them to ruin the soil life here in the garden. Of Of course, the New Zealand flatworm is going to be a challenge, but we're going to move on from that just now. This is something that I'll be keeping an eye on and keeping you updated on as we head into this year. There are a lot of positive things that I've got planned for the garden. Now, first of all, do you remember last year how we built a wildlife pond at the allotment? Quite a large one. I was involved in the first stage of digging out the hole, and then after that point, that place became such an oasis of life. Birds, insects, plants, so beautiful. I am going to be putting in a smaller version of that wildlife pond here at the house. I had a pond on the plot, the allotment plot, but of course I'm giving that up. And I love having a pond. And not only that, it attracts frogs, and frogs eat New Zealand flatworms. So yes, it's part of the strategy, it's part of the plan, but also part of that plan to make the garden a lot more wildlife friendly. I'm expanding the vegetable patch as well, the vegetable garden. This year we have the 12 beds, and you can see that the veg patch is slowly moving down the slope. And also I've put in 3 compost bays made out of pallets down in the middle of the garden. That is going to be the bottom boundary of the veg patch. And so all the area above it is going to be cultivated, and I'll be putting in a lot of soft fruits, so raspberries and blueberries and strawberries. A lot of that's going into that area down at the bottom. Maybe not the specific plants from the allotment, but similar, because I want to recreate the element of my allotment here at home. I mentioned in a recent video that this bank that's just down below the Polycrub is also going to be a wildflower planting area. And I'm working with the Manx Wildlife Trust to do a trial on a seed mix that they hope to make available to the public here in the future. And it will be a mix of flowers and plants that will support local wildlife, that will look great, and that will be perfect for sowing in large swathes. And so I need to get on top of the false oat grass in that patch, and then in the spring get that all sown up with wildflower seeds. And the idea there is, again, to support wildlife, but also to create a really beautiful wall of wildflowers like we had back behind the Polycrub this past year. I love growing practical plants. I mean, the entire topic of my book, A Woman's Garden, Grow Beautiful Plants and Make Useful Things, is about growing plants that you can use for food, that you can use for medicine, that you can use in soap making and home cleaning and creative pursuits. And so more of that is going to be infused in the garden this year as well. There's going to be a lot more of those types of creative plants that you can use in natural dyeing and skincare. So you'll be able to see a lot of that. But of course, if you're here for vegetables, don't worry, there's going to be mountains of those as well, and new varieties as well, which I will be introducing you to as the weeks and the months progress. And because I do plan on having a lot more different crops, I'm going to be preserving a lot more as well. And having a pressure canner finally at my disposal means that I can start preserving more food in jars. In thinking about everything that's happened over the past year, all of the builds, all of the plants, all of the crops, a lot has happened. But that infrastructure is in, a lot of it, and that gives me a framework to move forward and start introducing more plants and more plantings, and more exciting things to do with plants, and I can't wait to take you along on that ride with me. And you know, using this time, midwinter to the very first days of spring, so for me, the end of February when I start sowing seeds, this is a time that is a little bit of a pause in the gardening year. There's not a whole lot going on, and we can really take this time to reflect and think and set goals for what we want from our growing spaces, what we want to grow in this coming year. And one exercise that I do without fail each year is think about what seeds I have in my seed inventory, what seeds I need to get, if any, and to set out a seed sowing schedule. And I have a video that you can watch next that shows exactly how I do that. Although I've started using a little black notebook as of this past year, and that's worked really well. So you can watch that next and get inspired. And that is our first step heading into the spring season. If you have any questions about anything in this video, any of the projects, any of our methods, anything about the New Zealand flatworm or other challenges, do let me know as a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching though, and I'll see you next time here on Lovely Greens. Bye for now.